We all think we know the story of the Great Flood, right? Humanity gets wicked, a god gets angry, sends a flood, and one family builds an ark to start over. But what if I told you that story has a much, much older prequel? One with a totally different and honestly way more bizarre reason for the apocalypse. So let's get into it and uncover the original story. So let's just start with a question that kind of flips the whole story on its head. What if the crime that wiped out humanity wasn't about being evil or corrupt or sinful? What if it was something else? Something way more mundane? Because that question is right at the heart of one of the oldest stories ever written down. To really get this, we have to rewind the clock way back to a time before people even existed. Imagine a world run completely by gods. But it's not some paradise. Nope. They're the ones doing all the hard labor to keep the universe running. It was basically a cosmic construction site. And look, this isn't just me making things up. This comes straight from the Atrahasis epic, a Mesopotamian story that's almost 4,000 years old. This first line says it all. The gods themselves were the original working class, and they were miserable. And it was set up almost like a modern company. You had your divine hierarchy. Up top, the Anunnaki. They were the senior gods, the managers, the executives. And then you had the Igigi, the junior gods. They were the ones actually in the trenches, doing all the tough physical work. So after 40 long years of this backbreaking work, the Igigi just had enough. And this wasn't just them complaining. This was a full-on strike. They dropped their tools, marched right up to the house of the head honcho Enlil, and surrounded the place. This was an open rebellion. The whole divine system was in crisis. So you've got your entire labor force on strike. What do you do? The senior gods needed a solution, and they needed it fast. Well, their big idea was pretty wild. They decided to outsource the job. They would create an entirely new species to do the work for them. And yep, this is our origin story, according to this epic. We were created for one reason and one reason only: to take over the jobs the other gods didn't want. The text is super clear. We were designed to bear the toil of the gods, made from clay and mixed with the essence of another god, just to make sure we were up to the task. And you know what? It worked perfectly. Humanity was an amazing workforce. We did the farming, we built the temples, we kept the gods fed. But the gods also built in one crucial feature. They designed us to multiply. They figured, hey, this way we'll have a permanent growing labor pool. And that turned out to be a huge mistake. And this is where the story gets really good. Because humanity's big crime, it wasn't that we failed. It wasn't that we rebelled. It was that we were too good at our job. We did exactly what the gods designed us to do, maybe a little too well. So fast forward about 1,200 years. Everything's going great. Humanity is thriving, we're multiplying, we're spreading out all over the land. The work is getting done, the gods are happy. But there was a side effect that no one saw coming, and it was getting louder every single year. I mean, this quote just says it all. After all that time, there were just so many people. And all those people made noise. The constant hum of living, talking, working, it became a deafening roar. The text says the whole land was bellowing like a bull. And the gods, especially the big boss, were starting to get really, really irritated. And there it is, straight from the source. The reason for the apocalypse? Not sin, not evil. It was noise pollution. Enlil, the CEO of the cosmos, just couldn't get a decent night's sleep because his workforce was being too loud. So what do you think an all-powerful but very tired and cranky god does about this? Well, Enlil decided he had to quiet things down for good. But every time he tried to fix the problem, things just got more and more extreme. He got pretty desperate. First, he sends a plague to kind of thin the herd, but it doesn't work. Humanity bounces back. Then he tries a massive drought. Still too noisy. So he tries a widespread famine to starve them out. But every single time, humanity survives. So finally, completely fed up, Enlil decides on his final solution: a giant flood to just wipe everybody out. Then he'd finally get some peace and quiet. But, and this is a great twist, there was a saboteur among the gods. Another god named Enki, who had actually helped create us, kept ruining Enlil's plans. He'd secretly tip off this one wise priest, a guy named Atrahasis, who was basically the original Noah, and tell him how to survive each disaster.
even giving him the blueprints for the ark.
So Enlil gets his way. He unleashes the flood. The world goes silent. But that silence came with a cost he never, ever considered. The second those waters rose, the gods knew they had made a catastrophic mistake. There was no victory party in the heavens. There was just panic. The gods were legitimately terrified by what they had done, hiding like frightened dogs. The goddess Ishtar, who loved her creation, was just weeping. And then a very real, very physical problem set in. Their stomachs started to rumble. They were starving. It really is that simple. By getting rid of their workforce, they'd also gotten rid of their cooks and their farmers. All the sacrifices and food offerings, gone. In a fit of annoyance, they had completely destroyed their own supply chain. So powerful, yet so short-sighted. Now, this is where it gets really fascinating. Let's put this ancient story next to the one from Genesis that most of us know. The crime of humanity goes from being too noisy to being morally corrupt. The gods' motivation shifts from simple annoyance to righteous judgment. But the biggest tell? Look at the final command. In the old story, the gods impose population controls. In Genesis, the command is the exact opposite: be fruitful and multiply. And maybe the most shocking thing of all is this. In the entire Atrahasis story, humans are never once called evil or sinful. The only thing in the entire epic that is explicitly called evil is Enlil's decision to send the flood in the first place. So at the end of the day, this ancient story isn't really about how bad people are. It's actually the opposite. It's a story about how important we are. The flood wasn't a lesson for us. It was a wake-up call for the gods. It taught them, the hard way, that they actually need us to survive. Which leaves us with this final thought to chew on. What if this story isn't really about gods at all? What if it's a timeless story about power, where the ones in charge weren't these all-knowing righteous judges, but were just really bad managers who almost tanked the whole company because they were annoyed by the noise from the factory floor? What do you think?